The torch flame flickers against wet stone. You hear it before you see it. The scrape of iron on lead. The whisper of something shifting in the dark after 263 years of silence. Before we descend any deeper into this darkness, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. It amazes me that we can gather here, from dozens of countries, to uncover a story that's been sealed in lead and stone for centuries. Drop a comment, and if this kind of historical investigation speaks to you, consider subscribing. Now, let's go back to where this really begins. It's February 11th, 1869. Dean Arthur Stanley stands at the edge of a freshly broken vault beneath Westminster Abbey's marble floor, holding burial records that contradict each other in his trembling hands. He's searching for the lost tomb of King James III. What he's about to find instead will reveal something far more disturbing about what happens to queens after they die, about the cold mathematics of power that continue long after the heart stops beating. But to understand what Stanley discovered in that vault, we need to go back 2.5 centuries earlier to March 1603, to the moment when the most powerful woman in Europe began her slow, terrifying descent toward death. Queen Elizabeth II is standing in her bedchamber at Richmond Palace. She has been standing for 15 hours. Her ladies-in-waiting have covered the floor beneath her with cushions because they know what's coming. They're waiting for their queen to fall. The woman who danced until dawn, who commanded the defeat of the Spanish Armada, who spoke 5 languages and reduced ambassadors to stuttering boys with the sharpness of her wit. This woman now stands motionless, swaying slightly, because some animal instinct tells her that to lie down is to die. Think about that. 15 hours. Standing. Too terrified of death to rest. Elizabeth Southwell, one of her attendants, would later report something even stranger. The Queen had been seeing visions of her own, frail body, and a playing card, the Queen of Hearts, had been found on Elizabeth's chair with a nail driven through its head. A nail, through the face of a queen. Who put it there? A servant expressing silent rage? A courtier's dark joke? Or had Elizabeth herself placed it there, in some fever dream moment of self-loathing? We'll never know. But imagine the psychological weight of that image for a woman who had built an empire on the mythology of her own divine perfection. By this point, the Virgin Queen was anything but virginal in appearance. She had lost most of her teeth. Her hair had fallen out in clumps. She refused to bathe. She refused to be attended to. The courtiers who once competed for a glance from her now recoiled from the stench of unwashed flesh and the sight of blackened gums where a dazzling smile had once been. When she finally collapsed, when her legs gave out after days of standing, her servants carried her to bed. She lay there, speechless, for 4 more days. And on March 24, 1603, at 3 in the morning, Elizabeth III stopped breathing. What happened next should have been standard royal protocol. Examination, embalming, burial. But Elizabeth's lady of the bedchamber refused to allow a post-mortem. Officially, this was to preserve the Queen's reputation as a virgin, to prevent physicians from examining her body and discovering evidence that might contradict the carefully constructed myth. But was that the only reason? What exactly were they hiding? Elizabeth Southwell, that same unreliable chronicler, would later claim something grotesque, that the Queen's corpse was so full of noxious vapors that it exploded inside her lead coffin. Most historians dismiss this as sensationalist fantasy. But the detail about bodily gases and lead coffins, that wasn't entirely far-fetched. Lead coffins were the royal standard, designed to contain decomposition, to seal away the smell and fluid of decay. But they had a dark side. When organic matter rots in a sealed environment, it produces gases: methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia. In a wooden coffin, these gases escape through the grain. In a lead coffin, they build pressure, and eventually, something has to give. The funeral procession on April 28, 1603, was one of the most elaborate spectacles London had ever seen. Elizabeth's coffin was carried from Whitehall to Westminster Abbey on a hearse drawn by horses draped in black velvet. The coffin itself was covered in purple cloth, and on top of it, on top of the sealed lead box containing what remained of England's greatest queen, sat an effigy so lifelike that mourners gasped. It was Elizabeth, or rather, a painted wooden version of her dressed in royal robes wearing her crown, clutching her scepter. The effigy's eyes were open. Its lips were painted. It looked as though Elizabeth herself were lying there, still refusing to let go of power even in death. The streets were so packed that witnesses described people hanging from windows, perched on rooftops, clinging to gutters just to catch a glimpse. And when they saw that effigy, when they saw what they thought was their queen, there was such a general sighing, groaning, and weeping as the like hath not been seen or known in the memory of man. Her body was first placed in the vault of her grandfather, King Henry VII, beneath his monument in Westminster Abbey. But 3 years later, something happened that reveals the cold political calculus governing even the dead. King James I, Elizabeth's successor, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, whom Elizabeth had executed, decided to move Elizabeth's remains. He had them transferred to the north aisle of Henry VII's chapel to join those of her half-sister, Mary Tudor, Catholic Mary, Bloody Mary, the woman who had burned hundreds of Protestants at the stake. The sister Elizabeth had spent her life defining herself against. In life, they had been enemies. In death, James literally stacked them on top of each other. Elizabeth's massive lead coffin, weighing hundreds of pounds, was placed directly on top of Mary's, a grotesque double-decker tomb. James commissioned a white marble monument above them, but it bore only Elizabeth's effigy and inscriptions about Elizabeth's reign. Mary, who had ruled for 5 years, was reduced to a footnote, buried beneath her sister's glory. The inscription tried to smooth over the uncomfortable arrangement. Partners in throne and grave. Here we sleep, Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in hope of the resurrection. But the reality below the marble told a different story. Elizabeth's weight pressing down on Mary's coffin, century after century. The two women who had despised each other now locked in an eternal embrace of lead and stone and slow corrosion. By the 1860s, Westminster Abbey had a problem. The exact location of King James III's tomb had been lost. Burial records contradicted each other. Archives were a mess. Dean Arthur Stanley, a man with the methodical mind of a scholar and the soul of an explorer, received permission from Queen Victoria herself to conduct a comprehensive survey of the Abbey's vaults. What he was about to discover would be one of the strangest archaeological adventures in British history. On February 11, 1869, exactly 366 years to the day since Elizabeth of York had died, Stanley's workmen broke through the stone ceiling of the vault containing Elizabeth and Mary. The air that escaped was thick, old. Centuries of trapped atmosphere rushed out, carrying with it the concentrated essence of decay that had been sealed away since 1606. In the flickering torchlight, Stanley peered down into the cramped space. 2 lead coffins, stacked, tarnished green with age. The upper one, Elizabeth's, was larger and more distinctly shaped in the form of the body. That phrase, shaped in the form of the body, it meant the lead had been molded around her corpse, pressed against the contours of her royal form, and had held that shape for 2.5 centuries. Stanley documented everything. The Tudor rose carved into the lead, the initials, the dates. But there was something else, something disturbing. Graffiti, scratched into the lead of Elizabeth's coffin. A name, John Weir, and a date, 1645. Someone named John Weir had been down here during the English Civil War. He'd stood in this vault, perhaps alone, perhaps with accomplices, and he'd carved his name into the lead coffin of a queen. Who was he? A workman? A grave robber? A soldier looking for royal treasure? The records don't say, but his graffiti tells us something crucial. Royal vaults weren't secure. The dead weren't safe. Even queens could be visited, examined, possibly plundered by anyone with the right keys and the wrong intentions. And if John Weir was down here in 1645, what else might he have done? What might he have taken? The traffic in royal body parts was a thriving business in medieval and Renaissance England. Hair, teeth, bones, fragments of burial cloth. Anything that had once been part of a king or queen could be sold to collectors, physicians, or people who believed in the magical properties of royal remains. At St. Albans, the tomb of Duke Humphrey of Gloucester was regularly visited by women who believed the embalming fluid had magical properties to cure wrinkles. The sexton made a fortune selling thimblefuls of the potion. Physicians took samples for experimentation. When the liquid ran out, visitors took Humphrey's nails and hair. Eventually, only a few small bones remained. Queen Catherine of Valois had it even worse. For centuries, her corpse was displayed at Westminster Abbey in an open wooden coffin. Visitors paid Abbey staff for the privilege of viewing and sometimes touching a royal corpse. Samuel Pepys recorded in his diary that on his 36th birthday, he went to Westminster Abbey and kissed the embalmed lips of a dead queen. This was what happened to royalty once they were safely dead and unable to defend themselves. The monuments above ground told stories of eternal glory. The reality below ground was far uglier. Above Elizabeth's vault, the marble effigy showed her in splendor: crown, scepter, royal robes. An image from around 1618 reveals that the effigy was originally painted in vibrant colors: crimson robes, blue orb, flesh tones on her face, gilded lions at the corners. It must have been breathtaking. But by Stanley's time, all that color had faded or been scrubbed away. The effigy had become as pale and cold as the lead coffin below. Time had drained the life from both the real Elizabeth and her marble ghost. And below in the darkness, the woman who had commanded fleets and terrified the Pope was reduced to whatever remained inside a lead box, stacked on her sister like luggage in a forgotten storage room. If you could somehow descend into that vault today, if you could slip past security and crawl down into that cramped stone chamber, what would you find? The coffins would still be there, still stacked. But lead is soft and time is relentless. After more than 4 centuries, those coffins would show their age: corrosion, compression, possibly structural failure in places where the weight became too much. The inscription Stanley documented would still be visible, faint but readable: the Tudor rose, the dates, the initials. And John Weir's graffiti would still be there too, a signature from the land of the dead. The air would be thick, stagnant, heavy with the weight of centuries. And if modern sensors could detect it, they'd likely find chemical traces, the lingering molecular evidence of decomposition that never fully ends, just slows to an imperceptible crawl. Perhaps the most profound truth revealed by Elizabeth's story is this: death doesn't care about crowns. No amount of lead, no thickness of stone, no beauty of monuments can protect anyone from the simple biological reality of decay. Elizabeth, who had commanded the seas and defied empires, was conquered by the same forces that claim everyone: time, chemistry, gravity. The Virgin Queen, who never submitted to any man in life, was ultimately defeated by organic processes she couldn't intimidate, charm, or execute. The woman who declared, "I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king," discovered that even the heart and stomach of a king are no match for the cold mathematics of decomposition. And perhaps most ironic of all, Elizabeth, who spent her entire life avoiding marriage, avoiding intimate connection with anyone, ended up in the most intimate arrangement imaginable, her remains literally pressed against her sister's for eternity. The two women who despised each other, who represented opposing religious worlds, who could barely stand to be in the same room while alive, now share a space barely larger than a closet. Forever. In the darkness below Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth affirmed still lies. Her lead coffin slowly corroding, her remains slowly settling, her sister's bones still bearing her weight after more than 400 years. The Virgin Queen who never bowed to any man in life lies forever horizontal in death, finally conquered by the one force no amount of royal power could defeat. And if lead could speak, if stone could whisper, what stories might they tell? Of the nights when the Abbey echoes with more than just wind, when the smell of centuries mingles with something else, something that reminds us that beneath all the marble and pageantry and royal dignity, we are all, in the end, just flesh and bone and lead and stone, waiting our turn to feed the darkness that claims us all. The stinking coffin of Queen Elizabeth I is still there, still sealed, still stacked on her sister in that cramped vault beneath the tourists and the prayers and the ceremonies of state. We tell ourselves we honor the dead. We build monuments. We preserve histories. We conduct archaeological investigations in the name of knowledge. But maybe we're all just like John Weir, scratching our names into the coffins of the mighty, unable to leave them alone even after centuries have passed, still treating death as spectacle, still consuming the details of royal decay for our own fascination. The real horror isn't what happened to Elizabeth's body. It's what her story reveals about the living, about our need to disturb, examine, categorize, and ultimately commodify even death itself. In that vault beneath Westminster Abbey, two sisters lie in the dark. Above them, millions of footsteps echo every year. Tourists, pilgrims, scholars, passing through on their way to somewhere brighter. And below, in the silence that never ends, Elizabeth I remains exactly where power finally left her, trapped, still, unable to command anything, not even the dignity of being forgotten.